We're at this pivotal moment where AI has the potential to bring about significant positive changes in how we teach and learn. And we're going to talk about things around teacher burnout and supporting individualized learning to enhance classroom interactions and make education more personalized and more effective. But with this promise comes also the urgency of integrating AI into our educational systems. And so as we navigate these early days, and I would say there's still early days of AI adoption, it's crucial to understand both the opportunities and the challenges that come with it. And so I have the pleasure of introducing our panel today who will talk about these things. And so first, I'd like to welcome Amina Fazula. She's the head of tech policy advocacy at Common Sense Media, based in Washington, D.C. And she works on a range of issues, including expanding access to technology, digital equity, artificial intelligence, platform accountability, and privacy. Next, I have Dr. Kip Glazer, a school administrator and learning technologies expert. She's a proud principal of Mountain View High School, as well as a 2024 Computer Science Teachers Association Equity Fellow, and a practitioner advisor at the Engage AI Institute. Next, we have Stacy Johnson, the Director of Professional Learning at Khan Academy, who's dedicated to empowering educators to provide an accessible top-tier education for all students by overseeing the creation and implementation of professional learning. We also have with us today Dr. Heather Schwartz, the Director of PK-12 Education Programs at RAND, who researches education and housing policies intended to reduce the negative effects of poverty on children and families. And last but not least on our panel today, we have Pat Young-Pradit, the Chief Academic Officer at Code.org, a nonprofit dedicated to promoting computer science education and the lead of Teach AI. Our moderator for today is Irene Chen. Irene, thank you for all the time you've invested in this conversation and in the preparation for it. She leads Khan Academy's work in supporting school districts in the United States, including developing responsible pilots for exploring how an AI-powered teaching assistant and AI-powered student tutor might enhance student learning in schools. And so at this time, I'm going to pass it over to Irene, who will introduce our keynote speaker for today.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for taking your time to join us. I promise we're going to have a very lively panel conversation. First, however, we're going to welcome Sal Khan, CEO and founder of Khan Academy. Khan Academy is a nonprofit organization for over 13 years, has been offering to the world free lessons in math, science, ELA, humanities. You can go to Khan Academy and learn anything for free. It's been used by over 160 million learners in over 90 countries. Sal recently wrote a book called Brave New Words, which talks about his vision for the future of education and how AI will be impacting that. Sal's also the father of three. I think the oldest two, right, are teenagers. And he is also the founder of Khan Lab School, because Sal's vision of harnessing technology has always been to kind of increase more humanity in the classroom. So Sal, welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
No, thanks, Irene, and thanks, everyone. No, well, excited to be here, and I know a big topic on everyone's mind is AI, and to just frame the conversation, because I know it's very easy to get worked in on the technology side, but I think what we try to do at Khan Academy, and I try to do personally, is always try to take a step back and reframe it in terms of what problems you're trying to solve, as opposed to what technologies you're trying to use. And to help frame that, I always remind myself and others how I fell into this journey. You rewind almost 20 years ago, and I had just gotten married. I had family visiting me from New Orleans, where I was born and raised. They were visiting me in Boston at the time, and it just came out of conversation that initially one cousin was having trouble in math. I started tutoring her remotely. Word spreads in my family, free tutoring is going on. Before I know it, I'm tutoring many cousins. And early Khan Academy was just my attempt to try to scale that type of personalization that I was trying to provide for my students. And even in those very early days, I started creating what would eventually evolve into our teacher tools, because I never viewed technology as a replacement for what I was doing. I always viewed it as an amplification for what I was doing. We're very clear at Khan Academy. If you had to pick between an amazing teacher and amazing technology, we would pick the amazing teacher every time. Now, in some parts of the world, students don't have access to a teacher, so then the technology can hopefully raise the floor. But ideally, you can raise the ceiling by having both amazing educators and amazing technology to help those educators personalize and support the educators directly even more. So if you fast forward from that time that I was tutoring my cousins all the way till, as Irene mentioned, we've actually 160 million registered and many, many more folks who have used Khan Academy over the years. Everything we've been trying to do has been in that direction of how do you make it as accessible as possible? Our mission is free, world-class education for anyone, anywhere. So the free, and which is arguably the mission of the global education system, the free anyone, anywhere speaks to accessibility. But there's historically been a tension between free and anyone, anywhere and world-class. And we said, no, we need to do both. To us, world-class can mean many things, but it means high quality, rigor, accurate, and it means being able to meet the students where they are. I always say Aristotle was Alexander the Great's personal tutor. We can't afford to give every student their own Aristotle, but maybe, and this is why we set that up as our mission statement, we could use technology to start to approximate that. Over the years, we've been approximating that. As Irene mentioned, we've had thousands of videos that maybe many of you or many of your children have used. We have thousands, hundreds of thousands of mastery-based exercises. Mastery-based learning is just the idea. If you haven't learned it well yet, you should get as much practice as you need. So these very deep item banks. That last part is also very important. Actually, both the personalization of pace and the mastery learning, because if you think about what's going on it's not just the US school system, it's the global school system. A majority of kids who graduate from high school actually still not prepared for college level work. In places like California, 60–70% of students who graduate from high school enroll in higher education have to take remedial math, which is essentially 7th grade math. So as far as we can tell, what's happening is they have gaps in their learning. Let's say they don't use exponents 70% well, they get pushed on to the next concept, and usually something that's going to build on basic exponents. Maybe it's negative exponents, maybe it's logarithms, and then that keeps happening. So our goal is, how do we support students, how do we support families, and how do we support educators to support the students and the families so that those gaps can be filled in. Fast forward to recent times, AI comes on the scene. And there's a lot to work through with AI around safety, privacy, anti-cheating, etc. But to us, it's been pretty clear that if you can put the right guardrails around that, that it can get us that much closer to, in a very accessible way, amplifying that person or approximating that personalization that a great tutor would do, and supporting teachers in ways that they never had supports before. And to just give a tangible sense of what that looks like, let me actually share with you just a quick series of demos here. Let's see. Actually, let me share my screen before I turn on the slides. Okay. Okay. So just to give you a sense of what we've been building, and what you're going to see is AI within that learning experience on Khan Academy. This is a traditional exercise on Khan Academy. What's new is a little bot at the bottom right. We've changed the interface a little bit since this slide had happened. But what you can see is first, the conversation is recorded and viewable by your teacher. That's a safety mechanism. The student asks to cheat. It does not cheat. It says, look, let's work this through together. What do you think the first step should be? Student here is actually making a mistake. They didn't distribute that -2 properly. So I'm curious how you got to your step. Can you explain your thought process? Remember, we need to distribute the -2 to both the 9 and the 2m inside the parentheses. Let's try that step again. So this might be surprising. Even if you go to ChatGPT or whatever, you're not going to see this type of tutoring behavior, and you're not going to see it, especially be able to do this math type of tutoring, because as many folks know, these AIs are not always great at math. Now, Conmigo can also sometimes make mistakes, but it's dramatically better, and we see it making far more positive on students, especially who might be stuck and who might need that little support. And this chat is almost identical to something you might have seen between myself and my cousin Nadia back in 2004. So it points to the direction of what's possible. This next, this right here is just another example of an AI. It's not just limited to math. Here it's helping the student code. They're trying to get the clouds to part. The student says why is only the left cloud moving? And the AI can understand the code. But once again, it does not do the problem for the student. It does it with the student. It acts as an ethical tutor. And so it gives suggestions about how you might try to get the other cloud to move. This is an example where a student is watching a Khan Academy video in biology, about the science, the sizes that you might see in biology. And they ask the age-old question, why do I need to learn this? And so the AI says, well, what do you care about? I can help explaining how different sizes in science can connect to your interests. Student says, I want to be a professional athlete. AI, awesome. As a professional athlete, understanding the science of sizes can help you appreciate how your body works at a cellular level. For example, knowing how cells, proteins, and molecules interact can help you make better choices about nutrition, hydration, and recovery. Plus, it's always good to have well-rounded knowledge. And actually, it then remembers that you cared about being a professional athlete. We make that transparent to the student so that they can reset it and delete it. But then later, if the student wants practice problems, it can maybe make it with the context of being a professional athlete, whatever optimally engages the students. Now, all of this is classic tutoring behavior in some way. And we first piloted it in Newark, New Jersey. And so here's some of the students' reactions. And this was about a year and a half ago.
Many different things, and it knows Spanish, Portuguese, and English, and it's really smart, but it doesn't know everything. It helps me with everything, and what I like about it is that it helps me write like stories, and it's so amazing. It just helped me out with it. It didn't give me the answer, but it helped me out get the answer.
I feel like it's like a tutor, like a non-Spanish speak tutor.
And now I'll show you things that, the more we think about what generative AI could do, it almost goes beyond anything I was willing to do as a tutor with my cousins. This is an activity where students can talk to AI simulations of literary characters. We also have one for historic characters. So here the student says, I would love to meet Eeyore the donkey. Oh, hello there. It's me, Eeyore. Not that anyone would notice, but since you're here, what would you like to talk about? And so then the student says, why are you so pessimistic? And then AI Eeyore says, well now, isn't that a question? I suppose it's just my nature, you see. Some donkeys are born with a sunny disposition, others, well, we see the thistles more than the roses. But that's life, isn't it? We can't all be Tigers bouncing about. Now, what about you? Do you find yourself more of a Tigger or an Eeyore in your own life? And this is important because, it's fun to talk to a simulation, but we also want to make it actually drive a conversation in a way that will make the student introspect and make the student have to formulate their own thoughts. And that's what you're seeing here. It isn't just a toy. It is really trying to drive pedagogical, positive actions. Here, student can get into a debate with the AI. Student wants to debate whether the government should cancel debt. We sped this one up a little bit. The student says, I'm against canceling debt, gives a point about, it isn't fair to those who paid their debt, whatever. Now the AI takes the other side of the argument. They can do several rounds of this, and then the AI can give them feedback. And then they can switch, which would really help the student build their critical thinking and learn at least the positions of both sides of an argument. This right over here is how we are thinking about writing. And it's very, very important because I think it can actually not just support students better, but undermine how, things like cheating, which are people worried about. As you can see, the student is writing it. The AI is not doing it for the student, but it can give them feedback on that writing. And in the next few months, we're launching it. So not only can it do that, but it can report that all back to the teacher. So that if the student cheated, the AI can say, hey, this is shady. We didn't work on this together. It's not consistent with the student's writing. But if the student works with it on Conmigo, our AI, it can tell the teacher, hey, we worked on this together. I'm confident this is Sal's work. Maybe eventually even give a preliminary grade with the AI, with the teacher approving it. The last thing I'll touch on, and I'll skip this one for a second, is it's not just about students, as I mentioned, it's also about teachers. And so we've launched a whole suite of teacher tools. And these teacher tools are all accessible to anyone, where they can create lesson plans. They can create lesson hooks. They can write progress reports. They can share these with other teachers. those of you who have educators in your life, you might know that teachers spend anywhere from 5 to 15 hours a week doing things like writing lesson plans, writing progress reports, grading papers, etc. We think AI can, and we're already getting feedback from school districts that it's saving their teachers at least 5-10 hours a week, which is more time and energy for teachers, hopefully addresses teacher stress, teacher attrition, and hopefully more time and energy for their students as well. So I will stop there. For those who are interested in this, I'll go through this really quickly. If let teachers in your life know about these teacher tools. We could probably share this later. Here's a place where you can learn more about just educating yourself on AI. This is collaboration with other partners. And obviously anyone who wants to partner with us to really navigate AI together, we're very open to that. So with that, I will stop sharing, and I think we might have time for a few questions.
We definitely have time for questions. Let's kind of start with some foundational questions. Imani is asking, how can you guard against hallucinations in AI used in education and tutoring?
Great questions. And, for those who aren't familiar, hallucinations is literally the term used when AIs just make up facts. So a couple of things there. The way that we addressed it from the beginning at Khan Academy with Khanmigo is we anchored the AI as much as possible on Khan Academy human vetted content. And when it does that, you pretty much eliminate the hallucinations. Now, we do have some activities that aren't as anchored. And there, there's just a lot of work on the engineering and the prompting side to minimize that. I can't say fully eliminate it. Now, the other, I'd say equally or maybe even more powerful, the dynamic that we've seen over the last year and a half is that the underlying models have gotten dramatically better at this. I was making a digital literacy video a couple of weeks ago, and I was trying to make a video on showing how to deal with hallucinations. And I honestly could not get the AI to hallucinate in the ways that I used to be able to get it to. What's the mass of the sun to 9 decimal places, or give a link. And I think that's because the underlying models are also now looking up the information behind the scenes in many cases. So the models have gotten dramatically better. I don't want to say it's eliminated, but I think, especially if you're talking about most like research and fact-based things, it's quite good. But also it is important for teachers and students and any users to have some digital literacy. Just as before AI, if you do a web search, you can't believe everything you're seeing. You should look at multiple sources. You should make sure that the sources are legitimate. The same thing true as AI. And honestly, the same thing is true if you're meeting me at a dinner party. If I give you a fact, you might say, okay, Sal seems pretty credible, but let me look that up if I'm really going to anchor on it.
Sal, we have two related questions for you in the chat from Alan Goodman. He's asking, is there a certain kind of minimum age level before children and students can start using Conmigo? And then related to that, Naomi is wondering, how do you help, is it appropriate to help the youngest learners of kids ages 0 to 5 use technologies like this? And if so,
Yeah, so Conmigo in its current form, as you could see, it's using a lot of text, a lot of typing, kind of a traditional web interface. And so I don't think it would be appropriate in its current form for, let's call it pre-literate kids who aren't used to typing, et cetera, et cetera. So just that as a baseline, I think you're starting to look at least like second, third, fourth grade. And what we've seen is, especially if you get into the younger age, sometimes they struggle with articulating what they need. But we've also heard from teachers that can be more of a feature than a bug, because these students actually need practice being able to ask questions and articulate and have conversation. But with everything, it shouldn't be all about technology. You have to use it in moderation, whether you are 8 years old or 18 years old. For the very young kids, we have an app that does not currently use AI called Khan Academy Kids, which we've done a lot of research on, and it's across all subjects and grades. And it can be very powerful if you have some young people in your life. But once again, I would recommend doing that in moderation, maybe at most 20, 30 minutes a day. And even then it's great when it's being done with another human being. Now, I could imagine us starting to involve AI in that in some ways over the next couple of years, but it's not going to be exactly what you saw. It's not going to be like you have to type things. It's going to be more of like you're talking to it, or the cartoon character in the app is able to interact with you or hear whether you're reading the text properly and things like that. And I think if you do that, if it's age appropriate, it could be good in moderation.
Sal, we're seeing some questions in the chat from Wu Long and others, but can you talk about safety and responsibility. And what if, for example, if a child was engaging with the AI in kind of an inappropriate or unsafe way?
Yeah, this is something we've taken very, very seriously. And I would say if you're using this with kids under 18, I think it's table stakes. You need to have what I'm about to say. One, as I showed in the beginning, all the conversations are viewable by the educators. If it's a parent account, viewable by the parent, and they can actually talk to the AI about like, well, give a summary of what my child has been doing. And then we have a second AI that's monitoring the conversations. And if a student says, I want to harm myself, or they're doing something of a, explicit sexual nature, or they want to build a bomb or something very inappropriate, not only will the AI shut down that conversation, it'll actively notify teachers and administrators that like, hey, here's something that I noticed. You might want to take a look at it.
Um, and Sal, I think what we'll do is we are going to close on a question. Maybe can you look forward and talk about what might we look forward to in both maximizing the benefits but minimizing the risks when it comes to AI in education?
Yeah, I tell everyone technology is all about amplifying human intent. AI is no different. It's going to amplify human intent. Um, I think whether or not AI is a positive, it depends on whether all of us use it to amplify positive intent or not. But I think the places of excitement for me are, we talk about all of these things to support teachers. Hopefully we can get rid of a lot of, I guess, for lack of a word, teacher busy work so that they can focus more on themselves and their students. I think the support of students, so not only can they get unstuck much faster no matter what they're doing, but they can also even get motivational support. They can use these tools to do creative things that they never could do before. So it really enriches the classroom. And then all of that can go back to the teacher. I think you're going to see more multimodal, being able to talk and draw and, expressions and mime things. And that's coming in the next year or two. And we're already working on some of that. Conmigo actually can already do text to speech and speech to text, but it's going to get even better and more natural. I mentioned the writing, where teachers are going to have cycles where they can ask their students to do very rich things like writing or design or creation, and then get feedback and evaluation all in the classroom. So big picture, I think if we use it well, education could be one of the very first places where we see really positive gains from AI, and which I think has a certain poetic beauty because we'd be using artificial intelligence, AI, to improve HI, to improve human intelligence and human purpose.
Oh, well, thank you, Sal. Thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate you. And folks, I see questions in the chat about where can you access Conmigo. And so we'll kind of start dropping some links so you can kind of explore and kind of learn on your own. And at this point, we're going to turn it over to get the panel conversation. So thanks, Sal. Have a great rest of your day. And panelists, we are going to get started. Um, we are first gonna this next kind of hour that we have with you all, we are going to kind of break it up into about 5 sections. We're going to talk about how might we use AI to engage students. Then we're going to talk about how might we use AI to really enhance teacher well-being and enhance teacher retention. We're going to talk about ethical questions that we have with AI, and also talk about who is and is not getting to use AI. And then we'll conclude with how might the GLR communities, advocate for kind of early access to AI. And we'll be sure to be taking questions along the way. So we're going to get started with Pat, who has been just leading this organization called Teach With and About AI. And Pat, as you offer kind of some initial thoughts and a framework for how to think about it, I see there are some questions in the chat here. One is from Patricia, is about are AI responses pre-written? And I remember thinking you might be able to answer that kind of in the latter part of your framework.
Thanks, Irene. So hey, everyone. My name is Pat Pratt. I taught for 13 years, special education, science and computer science, middle school and high school. Been at code.org for 11 years. And I lead an initiative called Teach AI. And Teach AI is led by code.org, ETS, ISTE, Khan Academy. And I get to work with Irene and Khan Academy's chief learning officer, Kristen DeServo, all the time. And it's all in coordination with the World Economic Forum. And it's all about this idea of teaching with AI and teaching about AI. Next slide, please. So what is teaching with AI? Well, teaching with AI, yes, thank you. Next slide. Yeah, that's right. Teaching with AI is about using AI as a tool. And when you think about that, I want you to think about 3 buckets. Teacher support, so like creating a lesson plan. Student learning, like a lot of what you saw Sal talk about with Conmigo. And school management and operations. And actually, of those 3, school management and operations doesn't get as much love publicly these days, but it's actually quite useful to manage all the unstructured data that's being generated in school systems. But then there's this teaching about AI side, which is about how AI works. And it's really, really important to understand how AI works, even if you're not a technologist or anything like that, because the better we understand how AI works, the more effectively, safely, and responsibly we can use it. Let me give you an example. So if you can go to the next slide, there's all this AI talk. This whole hour and a half is going to be about AI, but how many of you all actually know what AI is? Let me give you a 1-minute rundown. AI started with classical AI attempts at replicating expert knowledge, like medical diagnoses or trying to play a game. And people did that by hard coding human programmed rules into a typical computer program. If this, do this, else if this, do that. And you had these big branching conditions that would ultimately approximate an expert's idea of a very specific task. Not very useful when you want to do things that it wasn't programmed to do and that are more complicated. So then came along in the 70s this idea of machine learning. And so rather than type in all the different rules yourself, we throw data at algorithms that can learn from the data, group and classify the data, and create patterns that ultimately inform outputs and predictions. That's machine learning. And that's really how we know AI these days. In fact, really how we know AI these days is deep learning, but we're not going to get into that. The next thing I want to show you is where we're at right now, which is generative AI. And so how did we get there? Well, we made computers even bigger. We threw more data at it. And voila, we were able to approximate how language works. That's where you hear large language model. And then from there, you can do a variety of things, whether with images, et cetera, et cetera. Not everything is based off of language. And so now you have generative AI. And the issue with generative AI is that the stuff that comes out is not really necessarily based off of truth. It's just based off of plausibility and patterns. And so that's why you have to remember to always check AI outputs. And because data comes from all over the internet, you have to check for things like bias, misinformation, and other things. And that's generative AI. If we can go to the next slide. Oops, that was the last slide. I want to just illustrate a couple more things for school-based folks. And I just want to focus on one particular thing, and that's, let's go with school surveillance. School surveillance uses AI algorithms to track attendance and make sure that kids are safe. And that's a really good and important thing. But on the flip side, there are ethical concerns around the efficacy of these AI algorithms and whether they're really treating people who are young, people with more androgynous features, or people with darker skin tones as equally as others. And so with any kind of AI thing, you're always going to have positives, you're always going to have risks as well, and you're always going to have, in some cases, negatives. It's never just a perfect thing. Thanks, Irene.
Pat, thank you so much for kind of grounding us. And to kind of answer kind of like, I think there was like a question here from like Patricia Lee, are AI responses pre-written? Patricia, these large language models are very good at have been trained to kind of predict what is like the next word to kind of to be written in the output. So the responses are not pre-written. Stacy, while we're on the topic of student engagement, there was a wonderful question from Salin here, wanted to share with you, which is what's the role of student patience and persistence with these AI tools? At what point should a student use the AI tools? And is there merit to students struggling to get an answer?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question for us to grapple with as educators and as an educational system, because we certainly have kids growing up and even adults in this age of instant gratification, right? I get real frustrated when I have to wait for my website to respond if it takes more than a second and a half. And while that's a little bit ridiculous, it's very much the reality that we live in. So the first thing I think that we have to acknowledge is there's absolutely a role for patience and persistence, and that using AI and generative AI in a classroom does still require that. Pat just talked about the need to examine the information you're getting for bias, for misinformation. So the first thing that we have to do as educators is think about how are we framing the use of AI in a classroom? When are we using this, and how are we teaching students to use this tool? Because it's not a one-stop shop. We don't put something into AI and then take what we get and take that as the final answer. We do need to be teaching students to verify the information that they get, to look for those biases, and to incorporate multiple sources of information. So that does take patience and it does take persistence, because students are very used to that one thing and I'm going to move on, right? So there's very much a framing that needs to happen. And then I think there's also a place for productive struggle. We've talked about that a lot in education. Students need to work through things as they build their understanding, not just of how to get the right answer, but of what the process is to get there. With that said, there's a difference between productive struggle and frustration that shuts kids down. Because a lot of times this idea of productive struggle and allowing kids to work through something results in students getting frustrated, giving up and walking away, or doubting their own ability, right? That's where we have this lack of confidence that can really be kind of poisonous to a student's outlook on education and how they see themselves as learners, as mathematicians, and so on. So I think what AI can do there is really be that tool that students can go to before they reach that point of frustration, after teachers have framed what is the use, where are we using this? Maybe we're using AI in a brainstorming process, in a drafting process, but we're going to save the actual final drafting or editing for something that we do in the classroom in pencil and paper. So there's also a role for how the teacher is setting that up for students.
All right. Thank you, Stacy. Kip, I'm going to turn to you. You are the principal of kind of Mountain View High School. You've been on the leading edge of bringing on AI tools. So we would love to kind of hear some kind of, practical or effective ways you've seen AI tools engage students. And our audience here too has also been asking about if there's anything you can share about AI and literacy. That's a keen topic.
Thank you, everyone. Hi, everyone. Kip Glazer, proud principal of Mountain View High School, Mountain View, California, home of Google, and where I think Khan Academy is also. So I have been in this space for a while, and I think Pat brought it up, an important point. The AI has been around, right? Like, I think AI became a vernacular because of release of ChatGPT, but machine learning and computer program and automation by association has been around for a long time. And as a high school principal, I walk into the classroom and I see my civics teachers using AI as a study aid for students to engage in a discourse, as Sal just demonstrated with Economy Go, prior to getting ready for their Socratic seminar or presentation. I've also seen my art teachers using it to generate images and compare it with the masterpiece as opposed to AI generated, and talk about the copyright infringement or what it means to be creative artists. So I think there is a way for us to use it to support student learning environment. And I think it is super important for us to really grapple with the AI literacy, because I just went to Shanghai not too long ago early July, and I was stunned to see that one of their high schools, 1,500 students, every single one of them is learning how to code in Python in English. And then they're fluent in English, and it's difficult enough to gain English skills. Having come from South Korea, had to learn to speak English myself because I came here and I'm an immigrant. And so I struggled to learn to speak English, and Python in and of itself as a discipline or topic is difficult, but 1,500 students in this one school in Shanghai, they all knew how to do that. And they all knew how to code. They were doing robotics. It was sort of like the thing that they are doing, not as a separate topic or CS education. So I just want us to think about how we set our students for success in terms of global competition and knowledge economy. And that's the thought that is rattling in my brain right now.
Irene, you're muted.
And Kip, we're going to be coming back to you so we can hear more later on about what your students and teachers are doing. But as you were talking about supporting students for success, I am thinking that parents are such a crucial part of that equation. So Carrie, so glad you are here with us, and we would love to hear from you what you think are the top questions or concerns of parents as they relate to AI in education.
So Carrie Rodriguez, and my most important job is being Matthew, Miles, and David's mom. And so I come to this work as representing the National Parents Union, but certainly, want to make sure that we understand that parents and families are very familiar with AI. This is not a foreign concept to us, like in our overall lives. We think about how we're talking to Siri and Alexa every single day. We see how we interact with it with Netflix. This is something that parents and families are using in daily life. And frankly, what we're seeing in the National Parents Union polling and in our focus groups is, yes, there is some concern around the responsible usage, but also an urgency around why we are not doing more to embrace this technology so that we are preparing our kids for the jobs and the economy of the future. So I think what we're seeing is parents are cautiously optimistic as we step into this world, because 87% of American families also want to see us using individualized education plans for every child in America. That was something that came directly out of our experiences with the pandemic and deep concerns about whether or not our kids were going to be able to have a sufficient recovery so that they'd be ready for economic mobility in the future. They want to see us embracing these new technologies so that we can actually get towards those places where we can stop just watching our kids struggle and really give them a plan of action. And that really is something that I think excites a lot of families. And they want to see us as leaders in this space, especially around education, kind of get over the fear factor and start having conversations, not waiting until we're already doing this in classrooms, but welcoming parents and families and students, frankly, into these conversations about responsible usage and, how we can get excited about this technology and how it can actually free us up. And I've heard this a couple of times in this conversation, and free us up to do the important work that also needs to be done by teachers and educators, which is, the soft skills, the SEL, and making sure that we have a more holistic education for our kids, which is also something that is very clear in our polling and all of our focus groups that is really needed by our children in this moment.
I definitely saw a lot of kind of like Kip. I was seeing you kind of like nod to kind of Carrie was saying about like freeing us up, right? We are kind of on the topic of student engagement. I also know that Amina, you have been looking into how our students are thinking about their use of AI and how they are engaging with it. What are you noticing?
Yeah, so our research team has just released a report and is gearing up to release more research related to the use of AI by students and by youth. But our most recent report in June of 2024 was about generative AI and youth. And we did that in conjunction with Hope Lab and the Center for Digital Thriving at Harvard Graduate School of Education. And what we found was that about half of young people ages 14 to 22 have used generative AI at some point in their lives already. And but only about 4% reported being daily users. We also found that communities of color were deeply engaged in using AI. So Black and Latino young people were twice as likely as white young people to report using generative AI at least weekly. And the percentage of those who ever use generative AI is similar across race and ethnicity and LGBTQ plus identity, gender, and age. We also found that the frequency of generative AI use among young people ages 14 to 22 varied somewhat substantially. So about 17% only use it once or twice ever, whereas like 7% use it once or twice per year. 12% use it once or twice per month. So it's still not used as frequently as one might think, but also there was a large chunk of folks, about 41%, who had never used AI tools before. We also heard that most of the common uses of generative AI by young people are for getting information and for brainstorming. So this is where the quality and the efficacy of AI systems used by students and kids is really critical, because they are turning to these systems for facts, for information, and having systems that are able to sort of stop at the water's edge and make sure that they're careful about how they're supporting and not doing the work for students is really valued by students, because brainstorming is such a key part of what they're using AI for. However, we found that among Black and Latino young people, they're significantly more likely to use it for most activities. So that's like full gamut brainstorming information, but also help with the schoolwork, making pictures or images, making sounds or music, writing code. There's a lot more engagement among communities of color to utilize AI tools in a vast array of ways. We also found that among those who had never used generative AI, only 34% think it would not be helpful. So there's, even among those who don't use AI, a lot of interest and a lot of support for usage down the road. And then finally, I think one of the negatives that young people are anticipating from the use of AI sort of sit around the future of generative AI. So the loss or theft of their jobs, theft of their IP, their creative work, their private information, those are concerns. Concerns around misinformation, deep fakes, fake news. And then the last is more sci-fi, AI taking over. But then there are positives. They're really excited for what it means for school, learning faster, easier access to knowledge, what it'll mean for their work, being able to do more in the fields that they care about, and then creativity, helping spur their own work.
Amina, what I heard from you was kind of like reasons for students to be using AI, like including kind of like brainstorming, generating ideas, etc. You know, there was like a number of things, but often what we kind of see in the headlines, or I think the fear, right? The fear is like, oh my gosh, like the kids are going to be cheating with these AI tools. So I wonder if this panel could kind of like address this head on, like, is AI increasing cheating? Is this becoming like a bigger headache for educators out there? I'm going to turn to Stacy and then I'm going to go to Kip. And others can kind of chime in.
Yeah, this is something that in professional learning, we're talking to teachers all the time. This is a hot topic. This is something that teachers are really eager to talk about. And I think, honestly, it comes down to how we define cheating. And we tend to have a very different definition of that for students than we do for ourselves. You know, I wonder if the fact that if I use ChatGPT to write an email or to assist me with writing a report, if my supervisor would see that as a negative, or is that something that's empowering me and helping me to do my work better? But we tend to think about that differently for kids, and I'm not sure that that should be the case, right? We need to think as an industry about what cheating is and how we're empowering students to use these tools for the right purpose at the right time. And a lot of that comes down to the clarity of the direction and the expectation that we have. Students can't rise to an expectation that they are not given by their teachers, right? So when can they use AI? How should they be using AI? And then we also need to be careful again about what we call cheating. I was at a university the other day talking to some college students that have been actively accused of cheating by their professors and told, you obviously used AI to write this. And the students, I didn't. I just, you know, I'm a good writer. I've always been a good writer. And so I think there's this tendency to think like AI is a bad thing and students are using it to cheat, and that's a negative. We need to focus on process, how students are learning, how they're using AI to empower their critical thinking, their thought process, their brainstorming, and change the way we think about cheating more than we expect students to just change a behavior that they may or may not be actively taking part in.
I couldn't agree more. And to add to that, I think traditional schooling has awarded quick acquisition of discrete piece of knowledge and regurgitation of that as part of assessment. So I think this is why we're here to talk about what is the future of learning, how we redefine learning. I actually wrote an article for Ed Week at how cheating detection tool does not work in school. In fact, it's creating more conflict between students and teachers. And I think post-pandemic, we go to brick and mortar schools for that human-to-human interaction, and learning must be defined beyond quick acquisition of discrete piece of knowledge. It is a social, cultural experience of humanities building together. And it breaks my heart when I have to deal with, as an administrator, right? Like when a teacher suspects a student cheating, they bring those students to us and say, hey, dole out a discipline. And I've seen students just become so devastated. Just the fact that beloved teacher is accusing them of doing something that they did not do. So I really encourage all educators to, as Stacy said, think about how you're defining cheating and what skills are you really trying to teach our students, and where does the AI tool fit? And as a teacher, as a learner with your students and adult in the room, how you're going to create the love of learning environment.
I just wanted to jump in quickly on that as well from the parent perspective. And I think that what frustrates a lot of parents is watching, like, and it was a blessing in the current
Harry?
pandemic.
Sorry, it's hard to hear you right now.
Okay.
Dang it. I try again now that your video's off. Oh man, did we just like lose it for a second? Okay, well
Irene, I was just gonna say, Irene, if there's I just wanted to add to the conversation around, you know, cheating and how we conceive of cheating. I failed to mention one thing that we did ask the students in our research report, which was, what's one thing adults should know about how teens use artificial intelligence? And their answers ranged, but one of the top answers were that teens may be using generative AI as a regular part of their schoolwork and learning, including, but not only for cheating. So I think, so some students said, yeah, we might be using it in ways that we shouldn't. But actually, most of the time, I'm using it in a way that I think is okay. And so finding a way to embrace that and support them, I think will be really important.
Thanks, Amina. Carrie, I see you're back. Do you want to try again?
Can you hear me now? Is this any better?
Yeah.
It was the AirPods. Technology, man. But what I wanted to say from the parent perspective, I think that there is a lot of frustration based on some of what we saw during the pandemic playing out in our living rooms in terms of really what continues to be a very antiquated approach to the delivery of education. And we still hold on to this 190-year-old model, even, having, 30 kids sitting in front of one educator, going on for 6.5 hours a day. It's so contrary to even what we know about the science of learning and how our brains work, right? So I think part of the frustration that parents have around this is that it's this mindset that cheating it is what is viewed as, not evolving what kids should actually be learning, what skill sets kids should actually be learning in the classrooms. Maybe they don't need to learn the same skill sets that we did 190 years ago, where you're writing the traditional essay and you're going through maybe there are new ways and new methods to introduce it, because our kids are going to be having to interface in a digital society moving forward. And there has to be time where we are introducing them into these skills, because we're not doing our kids a favor by just kind of putting our heads in the sand and saying, well, if you're not able to write out an essay in cursive, using a composition book the way that we did, in the 60s and the 70s, like, it just doesn't make sense for them anymore. It's kind of like saying, well, if you're using a calculator when you're doing the equations, is that cheating? Like, it's always this antiquated lens that anything that is new, anything that is evolving what happens in a classroom is somehow undermining, education, period. What we really need to do is start being much more forward thinking, because our kids are going to be needing to be prepared with the skill sets we need to enter into this future and be globally competitive. So when we start talking about cheating and getting into this conversation, I think it just goes back to the fact that, like, as friends were saying just earlier, like, what do we actually consider cheating? Or is this actually just new and innovative ways of using technology that educators may be not comfortable with quite yet?
If I can chime in about cheating as well. So there are lots of surveys that cover potential risks, perceived risks of AI in education, and the top two risks over and over again, and they swap places sometimes depending on the survey, are over-reliance on AI tools and then obviously cheating. Because ultimately educators want kids to learn, and over-reliance on tools and cheating are direct risks to learning. And the thing we have to remember, and I don't know if Kip already said this, I think you did, Kip, but I just want to emphasize that cheating has always been very high. Like, lots and lots and lots of kids cheat. And yes, there was a Stanford study recently that did a survey before ChatGPT and after, and showed that the overall percentage of cheating did not increase, because basically cheaters is going to cheat and non-cheaters are not going to cheat, even if they have AI. But the thing is that the nuance there is that cheating was already high. And then second, the people who are cheating now with generative AI versus just copying their friends' answers have a way more powerful tool to cheat in a whole nother way. And regardless of that, what should a teacher do? Because Kip's right, these detection tools are easily circumvented and really create a weird dynamic in a classroom anyway. You don't want to turn your classroom into a police state. So what's a teacher to do? Well, just ask yourself, why are kids cheating in the first place? Am I assigning too much work? Are they viewing this work as irrelevant? Maybe I should illustrate why this work is actually important. Maybe actually I don't even view this work as important, and I'm just assigning it because it's on this standardized test. Maybe you should be teaching something that's more relevant. These are things that we have in our control and that make learning better. So my advice to teachers always is just to rethink how we're assessing kids. Is it really authentic? Does it really make sense? The content that we're teaching, does it make sense as well? Assuming, obviously, that any of that is under your control. I know some of it isn't, teachers, but if it is, rethink what you're teaching and how you're teaching before you think about trying to catch kids cheating with Gen AI and all that.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for kind of like addressing kind of like what I know has been like a hot topic. And speaking of teachers and what is and is not under control, Heather, really excited to bring you into this conversation. Please introduce yourself and talk about the research you've recently conducted and talk to us about how teachers, who is using AI and who's using AI, who's not, and what you're observing about teacher usage.
Okay, thanks. I was excited when I was hearing Amina speak because many of the results from us asking questions of teachers are pretty similar to some patterns that Amina was explaining about students' use of AI. I'm an education researcher. I work for a research company, RAND, and we field surveys to educators, whether it's superintendents, school principals, teachers, and now excitingly students themselves. We're just standing up a youth panel right now, recruiting youth and parents into it. But here I'm showing you the results of a question we asked of 1,000 randomly selected teachers. Random being important because we don't want to just go to the pro technologist teachers and ask them about their use of AI. We want to get true cross-section of teachers and their use of AI for teaching. And we had, and if you're thinking, well, what is a teacher, how are they defining AI? We had said use of chatbots, use of adaptive learning systems or virtual assistants or other forms of software that embed AI for your teaching. And what you're seeing here, this is last fall, about 2/3 of teachers, that's the pink shaded section of the square, said that they were not using AI. 44% had said they'd heard of it, never used it. 13% said they had heard of it, but hadn't used it for work, just used it outside. 9% never heard of it. The blue shaded is what we termed AI users. 11% of teachers saying they're using it because they're using it through a software or curriculum that their school is asking them to use, like Conmigo, for example. And then 8% are, I'm using it weekly, and I'm actively seeking out on my own how to use AI for my teaching. Another 15%, I've used it once, I don't intend to use it, at least once, I don't intend to use it again. So I'll just stop the share. The point being that it's not a tidal wave of, oh, all the teachers have used AI for school thus far. This was last fall. I'm sure it's grown over the course of last year. But when we said, do you think you're going to be using AI in the future? 75% of teachers said yes. Meanwhile, superintendents, we asked them about how they are supporting how do they feel about AI in schools, and are they training teachers about the use of AI in schools? And in general, what we found was a cautious optimism. Yes, I'm planning to, or yes, I have, and yes, I'm excited. We heard much more excitement about making teachers' lives easier than we heard about I'm training teachers about all the risks of AI. So I would say there was a general lean in among teachers and superintendents about the use of AI in the future, but teacher take up is I don't know if you call it low, it's at the edge. It's certainly not the majority.
And these are the early days of AI. You know, I go back and think about where, like, back in 1999, what was Amazon selling? And they were selling books and CDs, and nobody ever imagined that back in those days, what are the possibilities of where? So we're in the very, very early days. So in some ways, that's not too surprising. But Kip, you and Stacy are the ones who've been closest in working with teachers over this past year. And so I'm wondering if you could share with us, tell us some stories about working with teachers. Where are they emotionally? I'm sure there's a range. And then how do you engage them as their kind of instructional leader?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I think there are similarities in any sort of new educational technology tool coming into school ecosystem, and I like to approach as like a component of the school ecosystem rather than just separate entity coming as a something different. And I think many of our teachers who are lovers of technology, they have dabbled in different types of tools. And I've seen my AP European history teacher using some of those very short and the AI-enabled tool within the Canvas system that she's using to do quick write assessment, and she's checking it to make sure that the AI tool is doing its job, all the way to teachers who haven't even heard of it, right? So I think we run the gamut in our school system. And my recommendation for my school leaders or colleagues is always go slow to go fast. We don't have to be the first one to adopt it. And I like to really dig into research to make sure that best practice has been established. And I think that is a responsibility of all school leaders, in that when the LAUSD chatbot conversation came up, some of my colleagues were very concerned about the accessibility to the data that was over 150,000 students. And I think we as educators need to really be very thoughtful about unwittingly exposing our student data and family data, frankly, because our student information system houses a lot of data, to ensure that what we are getting the benefit out of is actually comparable to the risk that we might be exposing our entire school community and families. So those are the things that I see at the site, and we try to be very thoughtful about whatever tool we're giving to our teachers and students, that we have great implementation and support plan. And that's the hardest part, I think. Aside from the effectiveness of the tool, how do we roll it out and how do we continue to provide professional development is really oftentimes left up to the school leaders, and we also need help.
Amen. I'll just say over and over and over again, like whatever education topic I study, it's about implementation. You can buy something that's amazing, but if it's not really used and it's not fully adopted as it's supposed to be used, it doesn't have the intended effects. And there's good reasons why many things are not fully adopted, but that implementation part is just so key.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in here to say that we've been working with implementations of various sizes and complexities across the country. And the number one thing that we have found is that teachers need responsive training. It needs to not be a single shot in the arm on a Tuesday afternoon and then we walk away. This is a shift in teaching practice and in the way students learn. So if we expect teachers to change the way that they're working, we have to support them through that process. We have to be, as solution providers, listening to what educators need, what their challenges are, and developing very responsive training in a way that honestly I've never done before. I've rolled out new frameworks in a state, new standards, new textbooks. This is different, this is bigger, and it's very emotional for the vast majority of teachers that we work with. So we have to be willing to acknowledge those emotions. And then honestly, I think the role of the instructional leader, the principal, the superintendent, cannot be understated here, because when we're working with teachers that are being asked to do yet another new thing, right? They deserve to know the purpose, the role, why are we bringing this tool in? And, there's why we're bringing it in today, and there's what we know and we think the potential can be 5 years from now. But for that initial implementation, is it to increase engagement? Is it to improve test scores in mathematics, or to improve our graduation rates for our concordance scores? Whatever that purpose is, we've seen time and time again that when leaders bring AI into the school without a clear purpose that they're clearly communicating, and it's more of we're just going to see how this works and try it out, it's not sticky, it doesn't work, and it results more in frustration than in a really well executed plan.
And I know, Irene, you're going to pivot us in just a sec. But I just want to jump on what Stacy said. Totally agree. And there are some interesting, we asked teachers, so among you teachers who are using AI, well, what are you doing with it? How are you using it for teaching? Number one, supporting students with learning differences. Number two, writing quizzes and assessments. Number three, adjusting grade level content to my students. And then I can go down the list, but I won't bore you with it all. But there are certain interests, and then we asked for some write-ins to tell us more details, interesting details about having ChatGPT draft recommendation letters for me, having ChatGPT do some of the gut admin work that I have to do. So coming in with teachers to show yet another tool. Yes, there's like, a tiredness factor and lack of bandwidth to do one more thing, but showing concrete ways that they can lift the load and have clear use cases for teachers' daily needs, I think would really help increase adoption.
And I know, Irene, you need to move on, but one thing I will say is I've been also a technology coach and classroom teacher for over a decade. And I would be the first one to say not every tool is the silver bullet. It's just that AI feels very different, right? And the speed it's moving and then the reach and what it can potentially do, especially in differentiated instruction and student assessment. So we can truly, if we do this right, I feel like, in my limited scope of understanding, formative assessment is where teachers really want to make sure that we can guide each student and their different learning journey, and the tools can truly potentially afford that. And I think that's why I'm excited to be part of this conversation, because this can be truly a game changer for historically underserved students in a way that we have not been able to do that with different technology. So that's why I think school leaders and decision makers have to be in the conversation in a meaningful manner so that we don't fall flat again on the implementation phase.
And I would just want to add from the parent perspective, I think educators really need to be prepared for parents and families using AI to interact with all of you. I see parents who are loading assessment data into ChatGPT to get an idea of what's a great action plan for my kid for summer. I see parents who are uploading IEPs to suggest, better goals for upcoming IEP meetings so that parents, are able to go in there, not just kind of in a defensive stance, but really coming in armed with ideas, based off of data that's been collected by, assessments that have happened in the schools. So I think overall, there is going to be a rise and educators should expect parents to also be utilizing this technology to come in and have much more effective conversations that are based around what's best for their kids. So it's to their benefit to understand this technology and start to be prepared for it.
Yeah, thank you all. The heart of why we're all here is like, how do we reach each individual kid where they are at, right? Speaking as a parent of like kids with like learning differences. I am going to, I'm mindful, we've got like 15 minutes left and stuff to cover, but we're going to go for quality. We're going to go for quality. This is not about like covering everything shallow, but I do want to give space to kind of like ethical concerns when it comes to AI. And I'm wondering, Amina, if you could get us started there, because I know Common Sense in many ways has been kind of like a watchdog for consumers and really an advocate for parents, as well as the broader community. So take it away.
Yeah, I mean, so I'll start by sort of smashing a few different things together. So we've developed tools around rating AI systems. It's an initial effort that we're going to continue, and this is an iterative process because these tools change and transition. And even if you take a look at our ratings right this second, it's probably out of date already in some cases. Saul mentioned the pace of change, and that's absolutely true. So ratings are a good tool, but yes, the field moves really quickly. So there's that. We've also invested in digital inclusion resources, specifically digital citizenship resources and curriculum to guide teachers and students as they explore using AI systems. and are developing professional development resources as well as parent-facing resources. This is all because as you use technology, any technology, there are privacy concerns, as we've heard Kip mention. There are platform responsibility concerns, making sure that the systems that you're using are healthy and safe in terms of like how they're built and how they're designed to engage with students. There's also an opportunity right now to make sure that we are empowering educators and folks who are doing the procurement at the administrative level with information ahead of time about these technologies. So for the first time ever, we can work with government and policymakers and industry to discuss what kind of pre-market audits and reviews could be done before this stuff hits the table of somebody who's making a decision for a school. That's deeply important because right now we're all sort of making these choices with very little information. And I think we've all sort of agreed that like in some form or fashion, these AI tools will likely exist in the educational space. So certainly it's really important we have the tools to support folks making those decisions. But that's not there yet, and there are no requirements. It could be done as a one-off. So I think it's really important that policymakers actually step forward early and start to think through like, what those pre-market audits and reviews would look like that could actually guide decisions for consumers and procurement officials. And then finally, the deeply investing in digital literacy so that it can be done iteratively is really important. So we're lucky in that the Infrastructure Act paired some of the foundational pieces that will actually turbocharge AI's ability to be equitably distributed and used. So infrastructure like high quality broadband throughout the country, that is a work in progress, but there is finally support for that. Making sure that people can actually afford that once it's in place. So there's an affordability program that is now lapsed, but there's work in progress to support that. And then there's the Digital Equity Act, which just this week announced a notice of funding opportunity. Now, this is a really exciting moment because we've been discussing all the work that schools need to do, administrators need to do, educators need to do in terms of AI literacy and PD. That's kind of an unfunded mandate at this moment. But the good news is that the Digital Equity Act can support LEAs in their ability to do this digital literacy work. So right now, states are trying to decide how they're going to use the total pot is $2.75 billion. States have this in hand and they really want to work with schools to be able to use these digital equity funds. AI literacy, PD, all of these things could be contemplated within the use of this funding. So that's good news, right? So we're talking about trust and safety and efficacy, and there's actually funding to support that. It doesn't come out of the traditional education funding budgets. So that's really good news. At the federal level, there's additional pots of money that are coming down the pike, like I said, just announced by NTIA. And so there's an opportunity to do that at scale. On the same vein, AI literacy support. So those are really exciting, but also really necessary because of our concerns around privacy, platform responsibility, and the lack of equity in the rollout of these technologies.
Amina, thank you for that overview. And I also encourage you, I know that Common Sense has put out kind of like ratings on some AI products. Maybe you can kind of drop the link to that kind of in the chat. I think folks would like those resources. I noticed on the topic of ethics, a couple of questions in the chat, just wondering about the environmental impacts of these AI tools. And I'm wondering if somebody has like a thought on that. Is anyone here feeling like
In the parent community, we're deeply concerned about the fact that our planet is on fire. And so much of our school infrastructure is not adequately prepared to deal with extreme temperatures, wildfire smoke, everything else. And then we're adding in additional technology that will also call for more use of fossil fuels, which is just going to perpetuate the existing issues here. So for us, it's very intersectional. So with the additions of this, incredible new technology that will help us, in some ways, there is also a significant downside, and one that we could potentially address, but we all actually have to acknowledge it and put some energy behind it. So for us, it's very intersectional, and it's part of our parent power agenda this year.
And I couldn't agree more. We actually have a green team on our campus, and every time we bring in new technology into our school, those students are actually asking those questions, right? How are we managing the energy infrastructure? So I have a lot of hope for our young people. And I also want to talk about ethical consideration in terms of, I'm going to go back to like student and family data. And I think it's super problematic when we are uploading our IEP data into with the student a specific disability and or identifying information into AI system that is not supervised. So I would caution if you were to do something like that Carrie mentioned about IEP goals, that we leave out those important identifying data so that it's much more safer for our students. And I also think that I worry about it, maybe this is just so far-fetched, but a world where students pretend to learn and teachers pretend to teach, and then the machine's doing all the learning and teaching while people are not even engaged with one another. So I just would want us in this call, as well as audience, to really think about what it means to be a learning person, and how do we define learning as really the collective experience sharing and creation, we using knowledge for the betterment of the future, if you will. I mean, as a public educator, I think purpose of public education is really to create educated populace for the protection of democracy and civilization. And all the things that we just mentioned in this call, including the environmental impact, is super important. And I think that we need to have collective responsibility to manage this very powerful tool that we're releasing and asking our young people to grapple with. So I think that I call on everyone to be taking this seriously. And that's why we're here, obviously, on Thursday afternoon, and that continue the conversation around that.
Thank you. Okay, we're coming into kind of like the last 10 minutes of our webinar together. So I'm just going to encourage all the attendees. Oh, okay. Sierra, you just popped up a poll. So please take a look at the poll. It really helps kind of the planners continually improve, making sure we're delivering you useful content. So please do that. Pop in kind of questions that you have to the Q&A chat. Try to get some that are broad. And I want to kind of just segue to the last couple minutes. How might kind of community leaders, whether you're leading a local philanthropy, you're an education leader, maybe you're a government leader, a nonprofit leader, a citizen, a parent, advocate for kind of early and equitable access, right? So this is not a technology that we want to be in the hands of the privileged few. We want everyone to be able to explore this in a safe and responsible manner. So
I can just start on that with we have already seen that suburban districts are more likely than rural and especially urban districts to have trained their teachers about use of AI for teaching. And that's a gap that we don't want to see grow or remain. So as a parent, and the parent of an 11-year-old, advocating to my school and my district about teachers being trained proactively about use of AI for teaching, for good and bad, clear expectations about how to use it, how not to use it, I think is an important thing for us parents to do.
I think it's really important from the parent, family, and community perspective that educators, districts, administrators make sure that they're not doing this to us and to our children without us, without transparency, without conversation, without really educating and having an open conversation. I think that's where trust always breaks down, and why we have such difficulties with like rebuilding or building those relationships with parents and families and communities. It's great to experiment with this stuff. We want everybody to be trained and have equitable access to these incredible tools, but making sure that you're doing that in community with the people that you're serving is very important.
I can hop in. I think that it'd be great to make sure that everybody takes a beat and realizes like the power that they all have in this moment. I hear like all the good work that organizations are doing, that schools are doing, all the great thoughtful work that's happening. And we can also encourage policymakers and industry to do some of this work as well. So I think as we decide how we want to use this technology, I think it's important for this community in particular to have their voice heard in terms of the types of safety they want in place around AI technology, around the kind of privacy policies, and not just like internal school policies, but the support you want from the federal or the state level, right? So that you have larger support across your state or across the country to protect your students. That kind of like thinking will be really helpful in ensuring that like the use that you want to put in place in your community is going to be healthy and will have efficacy. So, you know, at a baseline, there are lots of different ways to engage. You don't have to be an AI expert to support AI equity. Right now, there's opportunities to ensure everybody has access to the internet. That's baseline, right? Like that's a really useful way to ensure that your community has access to the underlying technology that AI is sitting on top of. There's ways for you to engage right now on updating COPPA, in updating platform responsibility, or actually instituting platform responsibility policy at the state and federal level. So engaging on that through your community, whether it's at the federal or at the state level, is really important. Those are opportunities to help shape AI technology on a larger level. And then being heard, especially if you are in the seat of procurement, telling the companies that you're engaging with that you want certain levels of protection for your students, for your community. It's really important. That consumer pushback is going to help drive better AI technology and better practices.
On the topic of access to AI tools, Pat, I'm going to ask you to share the Teach AI tools and just say another bit, because so often the way that families and students are going to get access starts with their local school districts. But leadership sometimes needs like, wait a second, how do I begin to kind of set policy, or what's the guidance that I need? Pat, talk to us about the practical resources that Teach AI has provided.
Yeah, so in August 2023, there were 0 states that had any kind of AI guidance published. As of today, there are 19 states. And somewhere in that, in October 2023, Teach AI, which again is led by ISTE, ETS, Khan Academy, and the World Economic Forum, worked with a bunch of other people, including state education agencies, to produce this toolkit. And the whole point of the toolkit, if you're out there and you're a leader and you're trying to figure out how do you lead while learning yourself, this toolkit is for you. It's published in a Google Doc format, just so that you can take it and use it, edit it, copy it, whatever you want. And so per Irene's question, this toolkit was created to help leaders guide their systems while learning themselves. And obviously this needs to be iterative, and lots of states are kind of figuring this out with the people that they're trying to serve as well. And for example, North Carolina has already revised their guidance. Washington has revised their guidance at least 2 times already. West Virginia once already. So look out for guidance from your states. That's something to work off of. And hopefully it's aligned to other things in your states. Like North Carolina, they align theirs to the profile of a graduate and their overall digital learning plan. Look out for that. I'm going to put in one more link so that you can find out if your state does have guidance. Yeah, but thanks, Irene. And there's a whole bunch of other resources at Teach AI as well.
All right. Hillary, I believe you want to close us out, right? So maybe I'll just like say like 1 minute kind of recap and then turn to you.
Yep.
Okay.
Sounds good.
All right. Folks, I think that a few things for you to take away is, first of all, I think the belief of these panelists and certainly kind of Sal Khan here is that like harnessed appropriately, safely, and responsibly, AI is not to replace teachers. AI is not going to replace the need for critical thinking, right? It is here to really kind of augment and enhance, hopefully kind of like lighten teachers' load, enable them to kind of claim back their nights and weekends so that as a result, teachers can like spend more of their time building those student relationships, have more humanity in the classroom, right? What I have seen so many parents call of like, we're in a world where AI is going to stay. We're never going to go back to a world without AI. So please teach us how like our students can think critically with AI, harness these tools and enable them to kind of like learn, work, and thrive like in a world with AI. You've got all sorts of different sectors here. You've got the National Parents Union bringing you data, bringing resources to parents. You've got Teach AI bringing resources to, you know, policymakers. You've got folks like Khan Academy trying to provide like great tools to districts. You've got Common Sense trying to provide ratings and advocacy. You have leaders, school leaders like Kip Glazer, who are on the front lines of figuring all of this out with their teachers and kids and school communities. And then you've got folks like Heather, who's bringing us the data to help us see the big picture and the trends and make sense of it all. So thank you for your time. I hope you found something valuable, and turning it over to you, Hillary.
Thanks, Irene, and thank you to our panel. And really, Irene, the only other thing I would say to that, because you said much of what I would have said in this last minute was, and so I think that our panel's given us a very clear call for a collective responsibility around this. And that looks very broadly like federal, state, local policies. It looks like leaning into guidance from people who've dug into this, from people like Teach AI, from some of the ISTE resources that have been shared, and to really invest in this for our most at-risk youth. So I say thank you to our panel for having this conversation, helping us look at where those gaps are. I say most excellent thanks to you, Irene. You were amazing, and thank you for opening the door to hear all of this so that we could hear all of this today.